Imagine this. You're a man paralyzed from the waist down, confined to a wheelchair for the rest of your life. For most people, this might mark the end of all ambitions. But for Franklin D. Roosevelt, it was just the beginning. Not only did he overcome his personal adversity, but he also led America out of the darkest depths of the Great Depression. And when the world was swept into the chaos of World War II, Roosevelt steered the ship of the United States, facing challenges so immense they could make even the strongest tremble. How could a man who seemed physically frail become such a remarkable leader? Could it be that true strength lies not in one's legs, but in one's willpower and vision? The extraordinary story of Franklin D. Roosevelt will leave you utterly inspired. Welcome to Faces of History. Here we uncover fascinating stories from the past and dive into the lives of legendary figures who shaped the course of world history. If you're passionate about history and the incredible journeys of those who made it, don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell to stay updated with our latest videos. Let's embark on this inspiring journey through time together. The life journey of Franklin D. Roosevelt. Franklin Delano Roosevelt was born on January 30th, 1882, in Hyde Park, New York, into a family that was not only wealthy, but also part of the elite upper class. His father, James Roosevelt, was a successful businessman, and his mother, Sarah Delano Roosevelt, was a highly educated woman known for being overprotective of her son. Raised in an almost perfect environment, with top-notch private tutors, annual trips to Europe, and lessons in aristocratic pursuits like speaking French, playing the piano, and mastering equestrian skills, Franklin's childhood seemed straight out of a fairy tale. Yet Franklin didn't let his privileged upbringing turn him into a complacent rich kid. His parents instilled in him values of responsibility, compassion, and a desire to contribute to society. These principles became the foundation of his future political ideals, the belief that those with power and wealth have a greater obligation to serve society. But let's be honest, when a boy grows up in luxurious mansions, enjoying breakfasts of caviar and warm croissants, who would have thought he'd one day become a president for the working poor? The early political career. Franklin's political journey began in 1910, when he was elected as a New York State Senator. Unlike many politicians who got lost in the power plays of state legislatures, Roosevelt focused on protecting the rights of farmers and laborers. A surprising stance for someone from his aristocratic background. In 1913, he was appointed Assistant Secretary of the Navy under President Woodrow Wilson, a pivotal moment in his career. Franklin quickly proved himself as an outstanding leader who inspired those around him. It was in this role that he learned an invaluable lesson. Effective leadership isn't about shouting orders. It's about listening and understanding. Roosevelt enjoyed the role so much that he often joked, "If I weren't president, I'd happily spend my life on a naval ship." But Franklin's life was never destined to settle for mere contentment. In 1921, Franklin D. Roosevelt, already a rising political star, was diagnosed with polio after a vacation. Within weeks, he lost the use of his legs. For most people, this would have been the end. But for Franklin, it was merely a pause. During the years he battled his illness, Franklin never gave up hope. He trained daily in a pool, practiced standing with leg braces, and even founded a rehabilitation center in Warm Springs, Georgia, to help others facing similar challenges. One touching story recounts how, at a public event, someone asked why he insisted on standing even though it caused him pain. Franklin simply smiled and said, "Because I need to look into the eyes of the people I serve." His answer left the room silent and affirmed that his determination far outweighed any physical limitation. In 1928, Franklin returned to politics, running for governor of New York. It was a tough race, but his persuasive speeches and focus on economic recovery secured him a resounding victory. Just 4 years later, he embarked on the most significant campaign of his life, running for President of the United States. At the time, the nation was gripped by the Great Depression, with millions unemployed and thousands of banks shuttered. Franklin made a bold promise to transform not just the economy, but the spirit of the American people. And he delivered. In 1933, Franklin D. Roosevelt became the 32nd President of the United States. In his inaugural address, he famously declared, The only thing we have to fear is fear itself. What was most remarkable, however, wasn't just his powerful words, but how he led under seemingly insurmountable circumstances. Franklin never let his paralysis hinder his leadership. Using a wheelchair, leg braces, and unwavering mental strength, he appeared before the public as a leader who was unbreakable. The story of Franklin D. Roosevelt is proof that true strength doesn't come from your legs, but from your willpower and vision. What do you think about his extraordinary journey? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to follow us for more inspiring stories. Leadership in World War II. 1. Historical context. The world in 1939 was a place of great turmoil. The Axis powers, Germany, Italy, and Japan, began taking bold steps to expand their territories and strengthen their dominance. Adolf Hitler, as the leader of Nazi Germany, was carrying out plans to invade Europe, while Japan launched attacks on China and set its sights on dominating the Pacific. Meanwhile, the United States initially maintained a stance of neutrality. Most Americans were reluctant to engage in another war, especially after the heavy losses of World War I. However, Roosevelt was not lulled into a false sense of security. He clearly saw that the war would not remain confined to Europe or Asia, and that sooner or later, it would inevitably impact the United States. With a long-term vision, Roosevelt began preparing for a war the United States had not yet officially entered. He ramped up defense production, expanded the military, and implemented policies to support the Allies, all without causing alarm among the American public. 2. Key leadership decisions by Franklin D. Roosevelt. During World War II, the Lend-Lease policy, supporting allies from afar. In 1941, before the United States officially entered World War II, Roosevelt recognized that the Allied powers, especially Britain and the Soviet Union, were in grave danger under the relentless assault of the Axis powers. However, both Congress and the American public were determined to keep the United States out of the war. Roosevelt needed a way to support the Allies without directly involving America in the conflict. Thus, the Lend-Lease Act was born. How it worked. The policy allowed the U.S. to supply weapons, ships, ammunition, and food to countries like Britain, the Soviet Union, and China without requiring immediate payment. This was not only a military lifeline for the Allies, but also an economic boost for the U.S., as factories operated at full capacity to meet the growing demand. Roosevelt explained it in simple terms. If your neighbor's house is on fire, you lend them your garden hose without asking for payment. Once the fire is out, they'll return the hose. That's exactly what we're doing for the Allies. Results. This policy enabled Britain to hold its ground against Nazi Germany in the early years of the war, and allowed the Soviet Union to counterattack after the German invasion in 1941. Over time, it transformed the U.S. into the arsenal of democracy, a crucial supplier that the Allied forces depended upon. The decision to enter the war after Pearl Harbor, when peace was no longer an option. On December 7, 1941, Japan launched a surprise attack on Pearl Harbor, devastating much of America's Pacific Fleet and killing over 2,400 people. This shocking event left Americans reeling. In a historic speech to Congress, Roosevelt called it a date which will live in infamy, a decisive response. Just one day later, Roosevelt persuaded Congress to declare war on Japan. Shortly afterward, Germany and Italy, Japan's allies, declared war on the United States, thrusting America fully into a global conflict. The significance of this decision: Roosevelt not only brought the United States into the war, but also transformed the nation's outrage into a unified national drive. He framed the war not merely as a defense of American soil, but as a fight to protect freedom, democracy, and world peace. International leadership, mapping the road to victory. Throughout the war, Roosevelt participated in pivotal international conferences where Allied leaders strategized the defeat of the Axis powers and planned the post-war world order. Casablanca Conference, 1943. Roosevelt and Churchill agreed on the strategy of unconditional surrender for the Axis powers, ensuring no negotiated peace would be accepted until complete victory was achieved. They also discussed opening the North African Front, the first step in the campaign to liberate Europe. Tehran Conference, 1943. This was the first in-person meeting of Roosevelt, Churchill, and Stalin. The trio agreed on Operation Overlord D-Day, a plan to open a Western front to liberate Europe. Roosevelt's amicable demeanor and diplomatic skills helped him act as a mediator between Churchill and Stalin, who often clashed over strategic priorities. Yalta Conference, 1945. One of the most critical meetings where Roosevelt and the Allies discussed the division of Germany after the war, the occupation zones, and plans for establishing the United Nations. Despite his declining health, Roosevelt played a central role in balancing the interests of the US, Britain, and the Soviet Union. Results: these conferences not only shaped the Allied strategy for victory, but also laid the foundation for the post-war world, including rebuilding efforts and the creation of a framework for lasting peace, transforming the US into a military superpower, building the war machine. Before the war, the US military was not considered one of the world's strongest forces. However, Roosevelt swiftly changed that. Expanding military production. Roosevelt called on American factories to produce planes, warships, and tanks at unprecedented rates. By 1944, US production had surged to over 96,000 aircraft, 29,000 tanks, and millions of tons of ammunition, overwhelming the Axis powers with sheer industrial might. Mobilizing human resources. Roosevelt launched massive recruitment and training programs for millions of soldiers. He also encouraged women to join the workforce, stepping into roles in factories, offices, and even the military, contributing to the war effort on all fronts. Results: thanks to these initiatives, the US not only entered the war, but also emerged as a decisive force in defeating the Axis powers. This transformation cemented America's position as a dominant global military power. A vision for a peaceful world, a lasting legacy. Roosevelt's leadership extended beyond achieving victory in the war. He had a forward-looking vision for a peaceful and stable future, establishing the United Nations. At the Yalta Conference, Roosevelt played a pivotal role in persuading Stalin and Churchill to support the creation of the United Nations, an international organization aimed at preventing future wars and fostering global cooperation. Rebuilding Europe. Roosevelt believed that a strong and stable Europe was essential for maintaining global peace. His plans emphasized economic and political reconstruction to ensure a foundation for lasting stability. Though Roosevelt passed away before the war's end, his vision profoundly shaped the post-war world and solidified America's role as a global superpower. His legacy continues to influence international relations and global peace efforts today. Franklin D. Roosevelt's decisions during World War II not only shifted the tide of the war, but also shaped the modern world order. From supporting the Allies through the Lend-Lease policy to leading critical international conferences, he demonstrated extraordinary leadership and far-reaching strategic vision. 3. Franklin D. Roosevelt's leadership style. Franklin D. Roosevelt was not only a brilliant strategist, but also an exceptional leader with a distinctive style. He combined psychological insight, outstanding communication skills, and adaptability to build trust, inspire others, and lead the United States through some of its most challenging times. Persuasive communication, fireside chats, conversations by the fireside. Roosevelt was renowned for his radio broadcasts, famously known as fireside chats. These talks allowed him to speak directly to the American people, explaining policies, providing updates on the war, and delivering messages of hope. Simple and relatable language. Roosevelt avoided complex political jargon and lofty rhetoric. Instead, he used clear, conversational language, making it feel as though he was speaking to each individual in their living room. A sense of closeness. His warm voice and approachable tone helped foster a deep connection with the public, even during times of war and economic uncertainty. For example, in a famous speech about the Lend-Lease policy, he said, "Imagine your neighbor's house is on fire. Wouldn't you lend them your garden hose?" That's exactly what we're doing for the Allies. These speeches not only reassured the nation, but also garnered support for difficult policies. Many analysts have argued that the fireside chats were Roosevelt's most powerful weapon of war. Not everyone can calm an entire nation with just a microphone and a warm voice, but Roosevelt turned the radio into his secret weapon, perfectly capturing his ability to inspire trust and unity. Resilience and adaptability. Roosevelt never let personal challenges or political obstacles hinder his leadership abilities. Image management. Despite being paralyzed and reliant on a wheelchair, Roosevelt consistently worked to present himself as a strong and capable leader. He avoided appearing weak in public, with official photographs often staged to show him standing upright, supported by special braces or aids. Adaptability. When the war erupted, Roosevelt quickly transformed from a domestic-focused leader into a global strategist. He adjusted his leadership style to work effectively with other Allied leaders, such as Churchill and Stalin, even when faced with significant cultural and ideological differences. Diplomatic skill, building the Allied coalition. One of Roosevelt's greatest achievements was forging and maintaining strong relationships with Allied leaders during World War II. Winston Churchill. Roosevelt and Churchill had a close relationship, almost like friends. They shared a common view on war objectives and frequently exchanged letters or met in person. Joseph Stalin. Relations with Stalin were much more challenging, but Roosevelt skillfully built trust by listening to the Soviet Union's demands and finding ways to balance the interests of all sides. Balanced approach. Roosevelt knew how to leverage the different personalities of his allies to achieve common goals. For example, he used humor and open communication to strengthen his bond with Churchill. With Stalin, he exercised patience and respect, ensuring that the Soviet Union felt valued in the war strategy. How do you satisfy a whiskey-loving politician, Churchill, while maintaining harmony with a leader who only trusts vodka, Stalin? The answer lies in Roosevelt's finesse, leadership in crisis, inspiring and motivating. Roosevelt understood that during times of crisis, people needed more than policies. They needed faith and motivation. Leading with optimism, no matter how difficult the war situation became, Roosevelt always exuded confidence and optimism. He often said, "The only thing we have to fear is fear itself." Inspiring through action, Roosevelt didn't just talk, he acted. He frequently traveled to meet with citizens, soldiers, and workers in factories. These actions created the image of a dedicated and approachable leader, reinforcing his connection with the people. 4. Franklin D. Roosevelt's alliances during World War II. Franklin D. Roosevelt was not only the leader of the United States, but also played a crucial role in building and maintaining cooperation among the Allies during World War II. He skillfully used his diplomatic abilities to connect nations with vastly different cultures, ideologies, and goals, a task that was far from easy. Achievements and mistakes of Franklin D. Roosevelt. 1. Notable achievements. Economy, the New Deal. When Franklin D. Roosevelt took office in 1933, the United States was mired in the Great Depression, banks were closing, unemployment was skyrocketing, and public trust in the government was nearly non-existent. Roosevelt responded with a series of revolutionary economic policies known as the New Deal. Economic revival. The program focused on three main goals: providing relief for the unemployed, restoring the economy, and reforming the financial system. Public works projects, such as the Hoover Dam and highways, created jobs for millions. Financial stability. Roosevelt established the Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation, FDIC, restoring public confidence in the banking system. However, the New Deal was not a cure-all. Many of its policies provided only temporary relief, and unemployment remained an issue until World War II created massive demand for industrial production. Roosevelt may not have saved the U.S. economy overnight, but at the very least, he turned days of unemployment into opportunities to build bridges and dams. War, leadership during World War II. Roosevelt not only guided America through economic recovery, but also led the nation through a global war. He mobilized the country's full resources, turning the United States into the arsenal of democracy. Factories churned out planes, tanks, and warships at full capacity, creating an immense military force. Roosevelt forged alliances with Britain, the Soviet Union, and other nations, building a united Allied front to defeat the Axis powers. Politics. Approachable and decisive leadership. Roosevelt redefined the role of government through his inspiring and accessible leadership style. His fireside chats radio broadcasts allowed him to communicate directly with the public, making people feel heard and involved in major policies. He demonstrated that government was not just a system of power, but a tool to serve its people. 2. Controversial mistakes. No leader is perfect, and Roosevelt was no exception. Some of his decisions remain highly controversial, leaving marks that are not always positive. Internment of Japanese Americans. In 1942, Roosevelt signed Executive Order 9066, authorizing the internment of over 120,000 Japanese Americans in camps. Reason: the government feared that Japanese Americans might spy for Japan after the Pearl Harbor attack. Consequences: families lost their homes, possessions, and freedom, despite the lack of evidence proving they posed a threat. Criticism: this decision has been widely condemned as a violation of human rights and is considered a stain on Roosevelt's presidency. Limitations of the New Deal. While the New Deal brought hope and relief, it failed to fully resolve the country's economic issues. Unemployment remained high until the onset of World War II, when the economy shifted to support the war effort. Some minority groups and women did not benefit equally from New Deal policies, perpetuating long-term inequalities. Relations with Stalin and Eastern Europe. At the Yalta Conference, Roosevelt made concessions to Stalin, allowing the Soviet Union to control Eastern Europe after the war. Outcome: these decisions facilitated Soviet expansion and the onset of the Cold War. Explanation: many historians argue that Roosevelt had little choice, as he needed Soviet support to defeat Nazi Germany. Even the greatest leaders occasionally step on the gas by mistake. Sometimes that misstep leads straight into a Cold War. Franklin D. Roosevelt was a man of paradoxes. A president in a wheelchair who could stand tall better than anyone else. An imperfect leader who left an almost irreplaceable legacy. From reviving America after the Great Depression, leading during a global war, to making inevitable mistakes, his story reminds us that greatness doesn't lie in never making errors, but in how you face challenges and move forward. So, what do you think about Franklin D. Roosevelt? Which of his accomplishments impresses you the most, or which of his mistakes remains the most controversial? Share your thoughts in the comments so we can discuss together. Don't forget to like, subscribe to the channel, and hit the notification bell to make sure you don't miss out on more fascinating stories. Thank you, and see you in the next video.